the last thing I have, and we talked about it in committee, is, because I had two parts to it, we didn't really adopt it in committee. On the special revenue funds that Conrad just mentioned, I wanted to go to the business and industry fund, and a motion I put forward, but I had a study in there that may not be real popular. It had to do with the economic impact of youth sports tournaments. But I would like to suggest that we limit the business and industry fund expenditures to what is raised in the business and industry fund. So certainly I don't want to risk any more general revenue being placed in that fund, and I know they have additional dollars, but I would certainly like to limit the business and industry fund expenditures to what is raised by that fund, and that's the so-called bed tax, if you're following that. So I'm not sure we have an increased amount for that. Maybe Conrad or Nick has the suggested potential income. I know it's all based upon 12 plus months away, but if I could ask one of them to say, what is the suggested increase in 19 for the business and industry fund receipts?
If I could have a second, I'll find my financial here. Here, if I may, for FY19, we're anticipating in the Business and Industry Fund, and just for those that may be watching, the Business and Industry Fund accounts for a gross receipts tax on hotel and motel stays. That tax is primarily earmarked to support economic development efforts, but in FY19, we're anticipating revenues of $508,000, and the expenditure amount is roughly $556,000. So we're in a small deficit situation of 47. However, we have a fund balance of well over 100%, or we're projecting a fund balance over 100% of revenues.
Fund balance is over $1 million.
Fund balance within the Business and Industry Fund the fund balance is approximately $430,000.
So okay, 100%. Okay, I understand.
Yeah, what he's saying is 100% of a typical annual spend in the Business Industry Fund. We have that much in reserve balance. That's partially of why there was a recommendation of trying to do some drawdown on it.
Well, just mathematically here, 400,000 is not 100% of 508,000. So, it's still not twice. The balance is not twice the expended receipts. And I would say, and I don't know how much, and I don't think our staff can give us that because we don't know. There are general revenue funds that are in that balance that have been used to subsidize that in the past.
Subsidized general fund balance.
Certainly, in the past there have been expenditures out of this fund that could not meet the public service agreement balances, and so general revenue was used to augment that.
Why would general fund balances be used when we have a balance?
Mayor Barrett, if I may, I think Councilmember Johnson is referring to, I've been with the city since 2001, and it's becoming a blur, but when we had a recession, we had made contractual commitments to our public service agreements, and at that time we did not have a positive fund balance. In fact, we were not able to fulfill our contractual obligations with those public service agreements. And at that time, the mayor and council, probably for a period of 2 or 3 years, reappropriated money from the general fund to the public service agreements so that they could remain whole. I've been here long enough that after that happened, then I think it was a recommendation for me as a city manager when I didn't see a turnaround on the Business and Industry Fund. We actually reduced the budgets for the allocations for the public service agreements. Good news is, and I think it was last year, we increased the Lee Summit Economic Development Council back up to full funding. So few years, we actually took money out of the general fund and assigned it there to try to offset it. and then we actually had some cuts, and then because of the growth of the Business and Industry Fund, we've been able to fully fund those commitments and then actually start building a reserve balance.
And the reserve balance is, as Councilmember Johnson said, it's not 100%, but it's
Sizable.
It's
yeah.
80 or more.
80%.
Yeah, Mayor, can I ask
Yes.
something? Was there a point in that time frame that we had someone who was delinquent on paying us? One of our,
I'll have Mr. Lamb comment on it.
yeah, I mean, it was like one of those years that we did that, and I'm not sure how much that was, but
You're correct. We had one hotel that was delinquent on making their payments. We eventually got that corrected, and so there was a large upswing when they made that cumulative payment. But as we've said, this year, we anticipate that we're going to take in just under $400,000, and that's the 100%. We'll have a $400,000 balance at the end of this fiscal year, which is 100% of this year's revenues and expenditures that we're paying out. Going next year, because we are increasing both the revenue and the expenditures, that will not be 100% of the fund balance. It'll drop to 68%. But you're correct. And to Steve's point, this tax has been around since 1998. And in the early years, we did have to supplement this fund. Some years, most years, several years, it was at least $75,000 a year from the general fund in order to cover the various expenses that were funded by the PSAs.
Okay. Yes?
yeah, there was also, and I'm sure that it came out of the general fund when we did that 100,000. I mean, it was, I think, Councilmember Holland talking, we all approved, but wasn't there $100,000? We didn't put that into this at all,
No,
did
ma'am.
we?
That stayed in
was
our
something
development.
Totally,
Yeah.
that was in our development.
Yes,
Okay.
economic
I'm
development
sorry, I don't want to
opportunity.
get it confused, but I knew we had someone who was a little bit behind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I
Councilmember Johnson?
mean, I'll move a motion, we'll see what happens, but I'm not, I have opinions about where some of this money goes and what production we get out of them and other subsidies they receive, but I don't really want to get into that tonight. I'm just saying that the city manager is certainly within his rights to allocate whatever the council approves in funding these, what he offers to the PSA agreements that we will have. And so I'm just going to move that the Business and Industry Fund expenditures shall not exceed the amount of revenue the Business and Industry Fund receives in fiscal year 2019.
Okay, I have a motion to cap expenditures to revenues
Yeah.
for the Business and Industry Fund by Councilmember, wow, I'm getting tired, Councilmember Johnson,
For 2019.
for fiscal year 2019. I would have to have a second to continue.
Yeah.
Can I get a roll? Somebody give me a verbal second.
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, for discussion. Councilmember Carlisle has seconded Councilmember Johnson's motion to cap expenditures for the Business Industry Fund to that of the revenues for fiscal year 19. So we have a first and we have a second. And now we have a discussion. Councilmember Carlisle, would you like to discuss?
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just clarify, Councilmember Johnson, do you want to hold that revenue to its, or I'm sorry, hold that to its revenues, not to include the balance that it already has? So they can only spend what revenues they make in 19, and even if there's a balance in there already, they can't spend it either?
The suggestion that 508,000 would be the revenue created in 2019, yes, my view is that that's all that we can spend out of that, approved to spend out of that account. And remember, I was here during those days that we had to use general revenues to augment these programs. I have no idea what's in this $400,000 balance, but obviously there's quite a bit that's general revenue, and that ought to come back, frankly, to general revenue. And although I haven't stated that, but I thought one way to approach this anyway is to at least limit in the first year their expenditures to, in 2019, to the amount they raise.
Okay, so Nick, if we were to do that and limit this fund expenditures to that of what revenues are, is that going to cut any of our PSAs for 19? Or do we have the money to pay them?
If I may, we have expenditure requests of 556. So if the cap is 508, there would need to be a reduction of 47,000 across those groups. Who and what amount is undetermined at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Forte.
With that being said, do we have agreements with these PSAs at this point that, for a certain amount? I'm not saying that one would not override the other, but I'm just asking, do we have agreements with those?
Yes, we have agreements with them. We always use a language subject to appropriations, so we would need to re-examine those agreements. If it's not possible, we had a bed and industry model that was projecting the 5-year, and why the staff did this, and it's certainly, all respect to you, Councilmember Johnson, I'm not wanting to be contradictory to your motion, but what we were showing was there's a continued growth model because of the new hotels coming online and those type of things, and we thought that the purpose of these funds is to for them to be used. So that was partially why we were recommending a very rare recommendation of actually having expenditure level higher than our current revenue balance. But Nick, is that something you can pull up, or if not, it's fine. No, go ahead and put it on the overhead. That thing will actually read the overhead. No, you can put it under the overhead reader, and it'll actually read your screen.
While he's doing that, my thought would be that this is something that you don't, I would not feel comfortable doing this at the 11th hour without discussion with those groups going forward. If that's something we need to look at in the budget as we're talking about it, that would be fine. This, to me, does not seem like the proper way to do it at all. And I can keep talking until you get that going.
I can vocalize it. Basically, we know that there are pending hotels to grow, and that our bed and industry fund will continue to grow. So our game plan was to go ahead and draw down on some of that balance. By the way, that I don't think that we can. I don't know that we can appropriate funds from one of these funds back into the general fund, but I guess that would be something we'd have to look into to see if legally we could do that. But, Nick, you want to walk us through this 5-year model?
Sure. What you have.
Let me just ask, do you want, Council, do you want to ask your questions before he does?
Yeah, actually, I just want to make one statement. And then maybe I'll withdraw it. I don't know. This is a battle I've fought forever. But I guess I have a problem with one entity under the public service agreements getting separate publicly funded tax revenues, and we're subsidizing them also.
Say it again. Say it again.
Well, let's just get direct about it. I don't want to. Let's just not beat around the bush. Downtown Main Street gets $60,000 out of this fund. They also have a community improvement district that's available to them, and they actually spend money out of that to that. So how many times does this entity get public money is really what I'm asking. And I'm sure that'll be real popular with certain people.
Well, okay, but in the big picture of this, I think that it's fine for you to question these things, but I think, kind of like Councilmember Forte is saying, is I think we need an overall plan with our PSAs before we start putting some of them at risk of not receiving funding. And I'm all about the merits of your discussion, though. I'm all about, what do they really need? What's the ROI, as we like to say. But at the same time, I think that is like, we need more information in front of us and a philosophy of us, strategic planning. So like, one of my questions, Councilmember Johnson, was talking about strategic initiatives. There was a slide that City Manager Arbo talked about strategic initiatives, and I'm looking at it going, man, I can't wait to kind of give our input as a council into what those are and the priorities, because we talk about priority-based budgeting. Well, I looked at that list, and I have an idea of how I want to prioritize, and I know that you're going to have a different idea, and Councilmember Forte, and we need to all kind of come together on that. I think it needs to be a discussion we have, but Mr. Arbo, you got to give us a little guidance as to how to address issues like that so that we can make the best decision possible. And I think right now, if we make a decision on it, we might be doing something imprudent or maybe a little rash. What are your thoughts?
I'm anxious. I think that the governing body and the staff has been consumed for the last year and a half on important issues, but at the expense of looking holistically at the city and developing a long-term strategy. And so if we can I'm supportive of taking time, looking at the strategic initiatives that drive the budget and making sure that our budget decisions are tied into it. I think that you're hearing from one council member who rightfully is saying that he would like to reevaluate how the funds for the business and industry tax is being assigned. I think that's a very appropriate
That's a legit question.
conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely is.
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I can count to 5. Another time to review this is when these public service agreements come before us. I assume they're coming in the next weeks, or have they already been approved by the previous council?
We would bring those,
Mark Nutting, Assistant City Manager. Those public service agreements have been structured so that I think all of them now are on every 3 years. They'll come forward, and then that's where that annual appropriation language is in for 2 renewal periods, so that they're just kind of streamlined through the budget process. I think this is the second year of that 3-year period.
They're all reviewed at the same time?
I believe they're all synced up.
So we're mid-year, or we're midterm on this.
We're through 1 year. This is the second year of that.
And I think when you review those, and it's been a couple of years since I have, obviously, there aren't any return on investment qualifiers.
We can work on that.
That's why I'm saying whenever we do it again, and
Yeah.
I don't want to take a whole lot of time because
I think that
I'm going to just tell you this. If
I wouldn't vote, Councilmember Johnson, I probably would, I guess I have to vote now as mayor with the charter. I probably would not support, the motion. I know I wouldn't, but I do support the merits of what you're saying, and that we need to address this in a way that quantifies it, in the future. And that's why you're chair of the budget, to talk about those things.
I don't want to take much time. If Ms. Carlisle will withdraw her second, I'll withdraw my motion. Let me just tell you again, I can count to 5. I understand what the votes are. I don't want to prolong this.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
realize that some
I
people
thought when
think
you
you
said
cannot do
that you can't, that you can count to 5, I thought that meant you're counting as in I'm counting like relaxing.
This place does not relax me one bit.
I thought that you were,
I'm talking the politics of any elected body.
You came
I can
back,
count to
sir.
82. I can count to 17. I can count to 5.
Okay, yeah, I think if you count to five,
I'll
I think.
withdraw her second. I'll be glad
Yeah.
to withdraw this, and we'll have another
Would
theoretical
you,
discussion.
would
in
you
18
please
months.
make that painstaking withdrawal?
Could I just address Mr. Johnson? for a
Please do.
Councilmember Johnson, I could completely support this motion if it would not limit the balance as well. I also believe that we should probably not spend more than we make in this fund. But since there is a balance in this fund, I don't see why we couldn't spend that. I mean, maybe I'm like a little kid with money in my pocket burning holes or something, but that's just how I think. So if you would like to amend your motion to that, I could support you. But I could not support limiting it and not being
No,
able to use.
and I appreciate that, and I would ask you to withdraw. I can still count to 5.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I will withdraw my second.
Well, I'll withdraw this brilliantly worded motion then.